Good morning. Welcome. Good to see you all again. A few minutes after we had a little opening keynote. What did you guys think of Marco's session? Some exciting stuff coming. So very cool to see that. Yeah, stay tuned for more of those. There's more seminars that are going to be held for learning more about what's coming. So sign up for those, even more in depth than what was there. But for this next 50 minutes or so, I'm going to be digging into layout techniques in the VCL. And how many, I kind of know the answer to this, but it's keep the energy moving. How many of you have been using Delphi since Delphi 2009? Okay, how about Delphi 7? Any Delphi 5 users? Oh, okay, we're starting to lower hands. How about Delphi 1? Any Delphi 1? Excellent. Some of the things that I'm going to cover were introduced in Delphi 1. But we can forget about it sometimes, and it's improved and enhanced over the years. And I remember years and years ago, Visual Basic came out around the same time that Delphi 1 did. And couple years after that, they were really big into the .NET. That was Microsoft's big push. And I had a trip to go to Redmond and talk with them. And they were teaching all the VB developers what .NET, VB.NET was going to give them. And they were so excited when they had the concept of the align property. And we had been using that for about 6 years already. It's like, okay, chill, guys. It's no big deal. It's just an alignment. But layout is such an important part in what we do in developing our applications. We want to make sure it's even more important these days because previously in the Delphi 7 and even 2009 days, you were pretty guaranteed that your screen was going to be 1024 by 768 and you were good to go. You might have had an 800 by 600, but you were trying to phase those out anyway. Anything larger than that was just the developer. And okay, fine, they have the big one and they're running it really tiny fonts and so forth. We didn't care about High-DPI. We didn't even worry about what that meant. But now layout techniques and being able to adapt to different form factors, even in the VCL space. So how many of you have done anything with FMX? Oh, excellent, awesome. So you guys know the principles between the two. I actually have a little bonus. If we have time, I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the layout techniques in FMX and how they're different. But even in the Windows world with VCL, Win32, Win64, we still have a lot more form factors and sizes that we're dealing with. Throw in High-DPI and 200%, font sizing, what all that affects. Layout's really important. So really just a quick overview of what we're going to be covering here. Basic properties, just a refresher, just to kind of dig into some of the subtleties there. Not very long at all. We're going to talk about some of the panels that come built in. They've been in there for a while. Some get used, some probably not so much. They could probably use a little work. And then there's a set of controls that was introduced back actually in 2015. Seems quite a while now. But they were inspired by Windows 10 low-level controls that were added into their new UI set at the time. This was all pure VCL native code, nothing that's tied to any Windows DLL or Windows version. So the same techniques can be running on, well, I used to say Windows 7, but end of support and all of that stuff. But how many people still have computers in your business running Windows 7? Of course you do. It worked. It was a really good version of Windows. So everything that I'll be showing talks about those. It's not just running on Windows 10. It can run anywhere Delphi runs. And as I mentioned before, some bonus stuff. So just digging in a little bit deeper. So I mentioned the align property. That is our granddaddy of layout techniques, is that align property that's in our VCL controls. And it was awesome when it was there. Now, I'd still like to see improvements made to it someday. I don't know if it's ever going to happen. But have any of you ever wanted to have, if it's align top, but I really want the left side to go all the way to the top. And so now, in order to do that kind of layout, you have to put another panel in the client area, line it to the left, line it to the client, then align the top inside of that. And we've all done those kinds of things. You know, the panel, TPanel or TRZ-panel, which you guys now all get, used to say, oh, buy Ray's components so you can get that. Well, Embarcadero bought it for all of you guys. So since 2015, Ray's components, the Konopka signature controls, are in Delphi. And one of the cool things with that is all the layout containers that are built into that library are available. And so being able to do things like that really make things powerful. One of the subtle things, and this is why I kind of bring this slide up, is Align has been in there since day one. Align with margins was added quite a bit later. And a lot of developers, even though they've been using it for a long time, forget that that's there. And it's really powerful. And I'll show an example of why we really like having the Align with margins in one of the Windows 10 inspired controls. And that's because it allows us to have a built-in buffering between the various controls that we are aligning with. And so right now, when you align something to the left, it takes up the whole left to the edge, right to its parent. And now you can adjust it by using the padding. So the padding is a parent down to the child. The margin is the child to the parent. And so by setting up the Align with margins, everything just picks it up by default. And it works quite well. Anchors were introduced later. How many of you have used anchors from the alignment? How many of you like using anchors? Ooh, a few like. Ooh, I'm impressed. I don't like anchors, to be totally honest, because I run into problems with them. I wish I could turn off the anchor at design time. Like, I want this to be anchored, but turn it off right now so I can rearrange and resize my form without them mixing it all up. Because what happens is you can get things off the screen because it's aligned to the right edge, and if it's gone, it's gone. So be careful, but it is very powerful when you use that. One of the challenges with anchors is when you start getting, it's really easy if you change it to align right and bottom, like you want that button in the lower right corner, so you align something there, great. You resize the window and it sits there. Where it has a problem is when you want it to kind of stay fixed on the left and stay fixed on the right and adjust in the middle and not be, not interfering with other controls in the mix. And then if you really want it to be flexible and move, like you really kind of want to have it adjust. And so anchors get you a little further, but not quite where we really want to go. That's foreshadowing for one of the Windows-inspired controls. And then I mentioned padding before, parent determining how the children are laid out. Okay, so a couple things, just real quick. More or less this section of the demo, let me close this off, is really only to let people know, in case you haven't seen it in a while, if you drop a control down and right-click, there's a menu here. Now, you probably don't have the little black square next to it. I can show you how to add that. That's a registry entry. But it's called Quick Edit. And Quick Edit brings up a little dialog that pops right where you clicked on the control, and you can name the control and give it a caption if you wanted. One of the nice things with the Ray's components panel is we take off the caption because that's the first thing we delete when we drop a panel on every one of our forms, so no need to do that. But what's interesting is you click the Align button and you have the visual indicators of where you want that aligned. So if you wanted to put that to the top, that aligns it to the top. And you can also go in and set up the margins and the padding inside of, right on the control visually, and then go ahead and click that, and there it's up at the top. So Quick Edit is your layout friend, and it works in both VCL and FMX. And so it's really handy to go after that. So I'm not going to go any more of that. That's just a little refresher. Okay, so standard panels, we've used these because I've been using Delphi for a long time. Obviously, your toolbars, your regular panels, controls, status bars are a layout technique because you have this section of panels or panes inside the status panel. That's what makes it valuable, is that it's one container that manages the different panes in it. The specialized panels that are built into the VCL, the flow panel, the grid panel, those are built in. They work, they do the job. They're a little rough around the edges. It kind of would be nice if there was a little bit more fine control for managing those. But they're there. Flow panel, as you drop controls down onto it, it will wrap them around. And if you need to change the order, you can click on the control and there's an index that you can have it rearrange and change. The grid panel, when you click on a control, you can specify the cell that it's part of. So pretty straightforward. Since we have the signature controls that are available, I would recommend trying out the RZ splitter and the size panel. If you've used the built-in splitter that's inside of the VCL, it's one bar that gets snapped to one of the sides, and it does split, but where it gets really problematic is if you want to hide the split side. So you have a list and you've got the details. I just say list and the details. And if you want to hide the details, well, the splitter goes over to the side and then you bring back the details, the splitter's on the other side. So you have to manually encode, reset that. I love seeing the nods because that's what you guys have all done that. So RZ splitter is a container that has the splitter inside of it, and you can nest it. So if you want to have two panes and then on the right side, a top and bottom, you can put two splitters and nest them. The size panel does essentially the same thing, except it's a panel with a splitter on the side built in. So if you don't need, you just want to basically close it off and open it up, you have a layout control for that. Okay. What I really want to get to is this. So experiment with all those other ones. You're familiar with them for sure. But these four panels were added into Windows 10, Delphi 10 Seattle, back when that was the whole thing. That was why Seattle was for Windows 10 and all the introduction for there. So we're going to take them one at a time because each one serves a different purpose. And it is kind of cool. You can interchange them. You can mix and match if you needed to. So the relative panels principle is simply to give you more control over groups of components. So a lot of times we want to have, as we're designing our form, certain controls need to be kind of connected to each other. Like if I have an edit box and I want a lookup button to the right of it, well, if I move the edit box, wouldn't it be nice if the button just went with it? And not have to build a custom control that has all of that in. It's just a layout. And I want it on the right on this time. I want it on the top or the bottom in the next UI. But being able to control that, group things together, would be really powerful. And that's exactly what the relative panel does. And if you do dabble after I show this, I'll give you kind of a crash course on how it works. The help actually is really good. It describes all the different things that you can do with this. So let's take a look. And there's a built-in demo. So I'm going to show the demos that actually come with Delphi. And then I'm going to go into Delphi because that's really where it's fun, when you can see it and experiment. So let's switch back over to this. And I'm going to create, I'm going to open up the demo first. So, and each of these individual projects are in the demos if you install it. So relative panel, so let me just run it, it'll be easier. Now that's got to have the right project selected, there we go. And so with this demo, there's 3 controls. This box in the middle, that is the relative panel. And so when there's controls inside of it, we can do some fancy things with them. We can connect them together. So, and what's kind of neat, if I move, I can drag this control around. And it's just independent. There's no connection to anything else. But if my edit 1 is selected, well, I'm going to select button 1. And I have all these settings that I can change. There are properties that I can modify. So if I want the button to always be to the right side of the edit 1, well, I can find the right of property and say edit 1. And you noticed how it moved so that it's to the right of edit 1. And if I move edit 1 over there, button 1 stays with it. Well, that's not, I mean, we're closer, but this isn't really good. We want the button to be a little bit closer to the edit box. And there's nothing that stops that, you know, from changing. Well, let's fix that. Well, let's align vertical is a good choice. Oh, I'm on edit. I don't want to align that. I want the edit to be my source because the button's kind of an accessory to it. And so I'm going to say button 1, I want you to be aligned vertical with edit 1. And now as I move this around, that stays there. And likewise, I could do something like take the shape and say, you know, make that align left with edit 1 and be below edit 1. And so now it's put right below it. And so this gives you an idea of what you can do with that. But I want to take it a little step further. Let's go into the IDE and create a new project. So I'm going to close those down, new VCL app. And if you have any questions, just raise your hand. I'm very dynamic. I can answer and continue on. So under, well, I guess because I have the raised palette menu installed, if you, UI controls, Windows 10, but they're in the Windows 10 tab for your components. And this one here is the relative panel. So I'm going to grab that, drop that down, and then let me go back up, grab some of the standard ones. I'm going to put an edit 1, edit 2, edit 3, and then button. I showed one of those things. I'll put another button. So what I can do now is when the control is inside of the relative panel, there's a technique, not often used, but you can attach properties to a control. So the relative panel actually attaches properties to any children that are on it, so we can make these changes. And they show up at the bottom of the edit when it's on the relative panel. So that's where you go. Those settings I had in the demo app, they're actually in the object inspector. So we can go in here. So I'm going to go and pick my button 1 and do the same kind of thing that we were setting up before. I want that to be to the right of, and if we drop this down, all the other controls are on in this list. So I want it to be the right of edit 1, and let me do the same thing, align vertical center with edit 1. And so now it's what we would want. Great. Now, I am going to, because I can see that it's right up next to one another. That's not that great. We want some spacing. Well, you probably all know where this was going from the first part of this, is I'm going to go and turn on align margins to true for all of my controls. Now when I slam them together, there's a nice gap between them. So edit 1 is there. Now I'm going to go and say edit 2, I want to make that below edit 1. So it sets up there. I'm not, okay, well, let me align that to the left. It's below it, so it'll move up and down, but it doesn't do anything to control where it's positioned. So let me align left. Nope, gotta make sure I'm the right one. Yes, I know, gotta pick the right one. Line left with edit 1. So that's good. So now as I move this around, that's nice. But what happens if I make edit 1? Oh, I don't want that. Wouldn't it be nice to edit 2 also resizes? So we'll click edit 2 and say align right with edit 1. And so now, as I move this around and make that smaller, it adjusts. And so I can do the same thing for edit 3. I'm going to put edit 3 below edit 2, and then do the same thing for tying it to edit 1. Now, I recommend having one control in your group kind of be the source of it. And make sure it's not one that gets hidden. Because if the control gets hidden, then it doesn't have necessarily a value in which to do the calculation. And so it may not actually move because it's still kind of there, but it's just not being presented. So you can get to some, there are some weird situations, you know, if you kind of force it. For example, I can make, let me change, well, I'll put button 2 here. If I make button 2 left of, button 2 to be left of edit 1, which it is, and I decide to move edit 1 over there, the constraints still apply. It just happens to be off screen, so keep that in mind. But what I want to do is edit, I want left of and align the top with edit 1, but align the bottom with edit 3. And so as I do that, now I've got, just move my whole panel. So kind of neat. And if I go and try to change one of the children, it won't let me do that because it's constrained to edit 1. So technically you can set it up. The control does do it tries very hard to jump out of that so you don't get into any problem because it's doing a couple passes to figure out like, oh, can I resolve that as best it can. But yeah, there are potentials where you can really kind of get it wonky. You'll just get an exception that shows up like it doesn't take Delphi out. It's protected, but yeah, the guy who wrote it did a pretty good job. That would be me, by the way. I wrote all of the Windows 10 inspired controls here. So just throwing that out there. Okay, any other questions on the relative panel? It's really kind of cool. And you don't need to do like your whole form in it. You can do multiple relative panels, you know, where you would need to kind of group them together if it makes sense.
This is part of the race component in Delphi.
No, this is Delphi itself. You don't need the Konopka signature controls installed at all.
Oh, okay.
It's straight. Windows 10 tab is built in Embarcadero. Okay, so split view. So split view, we've seen apps that use this split view all the time. Microsoft did, well, pretty much all of their apps that came with Windows 10 that they kind of uplifted has the same interface. There's a menu that's on the left, and it's got a collapsible side. It can expand out, and sometimes it overlaps the content. Sometimes it pushes the content over. And so we made a VCL control that does that. So it's not a .NET only thing. And so it has these various pieces. So the easiest thing to do for this is take a look at the demo. And close that down. This one's better to do in the demo because it's got all the other stuff pre-built. There's icons and other stuff on it. So let me change the mode. So right now it's dropped. It's sitting over on the left side. It's got some menus. It's just a panel. So you can drop whatever you want on it, so forth. But where it's fun is when I go and run it. So I've done a little coloring. It's picked up some stuff, but we have various properties. And when you click the hamburger icon, which is just a button that you can associate with the split view to say, hey, I'm going to be the external thing that controls whether you're open or not. So you're not tied to that look and feel. You can make it whatever you want, or you may just do it programmatically through other interactions in your app and not have a hamburger button that does that. And so based on the settings, so if it's docked, the content area shifts over to fill it. If it is overlap, well, you can already see it. It goes behind it and the panel snaps on top of it. You can put it to either side. The compact gives you a minimum size, and you can control that. So if your icons that you wanted were a different size, you can control how much space is in there. You can go ahead and open it. The close on the menu click is that if this is a menu and I click that, then it automatically closes. It shows some of it because it's in compact mode. You can go and take off the animation if you wanted. It just snaps forward, but if you want to make it a little fancier, it slides. So pretty straightforward. Any questions on the split view? Some of the simplest controls are very effective when it's nice and easy to drop it on a form, put stuff in it, and now it takes care of hiding it and showing it for you. All right, next up is the card panel. So the card panel is an interesting control because the easiest way to think about it is, have you ever used well, it used to be the T notebook back in the Delphi 1, 2, and 3 days. Was a notebook, but you could hide the tabs, and a lot of people did that because they wanted to have basically multiple views, but they didn't want the really basic Windows 3.1 style tabs to show up. So you would start it up, and you can do the same thing with a page control now. You can create a page control, although it's harder to get rid of the bordering and so forth. But you can hide the tabs, and now you have multiple views that are put into there. The card panel is essentially that, but with no tabs or anything at all. But you still kind of have the same concepts that you would with it. There's a concept of an active card, so which one's on top. There is an order, so you have an index, change which ones come next, and there's built-in gestures and events. So you can swipe, for example, that's built into the card if you wanted to swipe through different cards, and methods, of course, to do the same thing. So, of course, the best thing to do is take a look at the demo, so switching over to the card panel. This one is just really simple. It's just to give an illustration of what you can do, but it's a panel. I've dropped an image down in each of the panels, or cards, I should say, so because it's a card panel. And so each card has no UI, it's just managing different content. And you can go and, with the card panel, you can change did I put that? Oh yeah, new card, and you can go and select the card. So card 1, you can right click because there's editors with it. You can go to card 4 and switches all that up. You can add a new card by right clicking on the card panel to create the new one, very much like a tab control or page control. And so if I go ahead and run this, all this is doing is iterating through the different pictures, and they cycle. So it's not going to the edge of the tabs and then you stop because there's no next tab. This just cycles all the way around. So like a carousel for movies and things like that. What's cool is you can also do the gestures. So I'm actually click dragging inside the control. That's built in. Doesn't matter what you put on it. It traps the gesture and says, oh, go to the next or previous card depending on the direction. And there's a property that, I don't know if you pick that up, the loop property determines whether you loop or not. So if you didn't want it to, you can stop it from doing that. All right. Next cool one. How you doing? 11:33. Oh, good. We will have time to talk some of the FMX stuff. So the stack panel is the fourth new panel, Windows-inspired one. And this is actually really kind of cool. And I think it's one of the reasons why I do this talk is to make more Delphi developers aware that it exists, because it's a common technique in other platforms, other frameworks that do similar kinds of things. A horizontal stack or a vertical stack, you might have have heard of. React has the concept, Swift UI has the concept if you've done any iOS development, and it's really quite powerful, especially when you like mix them together, where I want to have a horizontal stack inside of a vertical stack and do things with it. And it allows us to really just what it describes is position controls with very easily vertically or horizontally. And then when you start to mix and match them, it becomes quite powerful. So a bunch of properties that we can do. Let's see the demo, and then we'll look at it inside the IDE. And so let me go ahead and run the demo. Pretty straightforward. The stack panel is the thing down at the bottom here. These are all just changing the properties and settings that are available and doing it at runtime. If you've ever seen my component building talks back in the day, and I actually am resurrecting them now because we have a lot of newer developers and people are interested in how to do that. This is the test bed to make sure that the control worked. I always build a test app and then that drives the development. All these panels were no different. So what this is doing is I have a vertical stack. The positioning of these controls is managed by the stack. Now the sizing, that's obviously up to you, but where they are inside of the stack, and this stack is vertical, hence its layout. If I change it to horizontal, it changes to horizontal. The default positioning, the vertical positioning, is centered. We can certainly change that to be to the top. Then it uses the top for each one of those. And you can the other ones you have the bottom. Fill is kind of interesting because it fills to the top and bottom of your panel. Now, this is probably not desired, but you can envision that if the stack itself was shorter, that's not necessarily bad, having it fill to the top and bottom, especially if you're going to need to scale because High-DPI wants to go double size. So there's some things that we can really take advantage of there. But I'm going to go put it back to center. This is the typical thing that you would do. I could also go back to vertical center. Vertical orientation, I have it aligned left. If I center it, then everything is centered based on the width of those controls. So that works quite well. Obviously the fill, now the fill horizontal with the vertical layout with the horizontal positioning, that could be quite cool, especially if you want to now put labels on each one and override the labels. And so, which is the label itself in this example, the control is taking up the whole top part, but there's an alignment on the label itself that will control that. And you can also override the positioning at the control level. So if you wanted the label to be centered or left or whatever you wanted it to do, you can do that and control it. So there's quite a bit of things. And what's kind of cool is that it remembers what its native size is. So, because if you do that with like alignment, if you align a panel or a label to the top of the form and then say align none, well, it's the same size, what it was, how you changed it. Once in a blue moon, you might get lucky and it goes back, but again, it depends if no other changes were saved to the DFM beforehand, and it figures that out. So going in, and then there's properties to control the spacing and padding inside of it. So if we wanted to give more space, just increase the spacing between each of the controls. It's all built in. So let me go back and bring up a new VCL app and go back to my UI controls Windows 10. And why I got to change, where's my, here we go. So here's the stack panel. So we drop one of these down. Let me go back up. Where's my standard ones? So we'll drop an edit. No, we'll drop a button, I don't care. Let's see here, put a menu and, I guess we put it, well, I guess that's too much. But what I really want to get to is So this is like the relative panel. When you go and click on one of them, you get the positioning, the overrides, and the control index. So if you needed to change the order, if we wanted the button to be at the bottom, just go down and we can change the control index to be 2, and now it's at the bottom. So you have that flexibility. But what's really neat is go back to your Windows 10 and grab another stack panel and plop that guy on there, and we'll change the orientation. So how many of you have used Ray's components or the Konopka signature controls? A couple, maybe years ago. You should definitely, I encourage you to take a look at it, and I'll show a little bit of it down at the booth. But one of the things that I put into that product from the get-go was a lot of design editors. And that's why these controls have the same design editor functionality. So things that you commonly want to do to controls, be able to do it by just right-clicking on it, not searching for the right property inside the object inspector. So changing the orientation, probably the most important thing you want to do with a stack panel. So it's right there. So I'm going to change this to be horizontal. So I'm in a vertical stack, but now I have a horizontal stack inside of it. So what might be useful for that is going back to that example where, oh, too far, go back, I put an edit box and a button, and they're taking up the space. So I can have that being controlled, and I can control the spacing between that and have multiple combinations of it. So I could have multiple horizontal stacks inside of that control. You could also put a relative panel inside the stack panel to do combinations for it. And then the panel itself is what gives us those spacing properties. So spacing, so 5 gives it up, and then padding itself has the same padding that you would normally have because it's a panel, so it has all the pieces. And you can remove the border very easily by right-clicking and saying remove border. So if you wanted it in something else or on a page, you could put that inside of a tab control or a page control, and it wouldn't change what the page control looks like. It would just have the layout capabilities in there. All right. So in just a few more minutes left. Several of you are using FMX. It's quite possible, it's quite powerful. And there's a different way that it does layouts that I actually really like, and it would be really kind of cool to have some of these things brought over to the VCL. But it's really in the way that FMX works allows this to happen. Two main things. One, FMX doesn't rely on window handles. They're there, but they're not core to containership. Any control can contain another control. You can have a label that is inside of a button as a parent. You can't do that in the VCL. You know, it doesn't work like that at all. In the VCL, you have to have a window handle to have containership, to be a parent-child. So a panel, which is our favorite layout control, takes up a window handle. And it would be nice if it didn't, but it does. It's the only way we can get around it. Well, the layout control, T-layout in FMX, is just pure layout. It has containership and ownership. It has no window handle. It doesn't affect anything. It's very lightweight. So yeah, you can drop nested ones in and give it the spacing you want, positioning it. It's quite powerful. And then the various descendants of it give you a scaled layout, gives you grid layout, a little bit more refined than the VCL versions. Same thing with the flow layout is actually quite cool because it's designed for, really, if you know the history of FMX and FireMonkey, it was for getting cross-platform and really mobile. You know, iOS and Android, because you have, you know, your phone is going to go from horizontal to vertical and change, and so you want things to adapt. So flow layouts really work well in that environment. So definitely try those out as you get through. I'm not going to go through that because we just have, I want to make sure we have any time for any questions. all the samples there are in your Delphi install. If you install the samples, they're in your version. From Delphi 10 on up, they're in every single one of those. So you just go find it where your samples are installed. They're all there under the VCL. And does anybody have any questions? Thank you.